Yo, what up, everyone? It's Paul. Welcome to the Portal Room. Today we got a good one. I've been really excited for today's guest, and I'm actually really looking forward to the conversation. So, joining us today is researcher, experiencer, and of course, the host of the Engaging the Phenomena podcast. We got James. Hey, what's going on, man?
Hey, man. Happy to be here.
Oh, yeah, let's get into it. So, I know you've kind of gone through a lot of your experiences, right, on a ton of podcasts, but just for the sake of getting into some of the backstory, I know from your other interviews, you've mentioned that you began having experiences as a child. So let's maybe start from the beginning, and then we can maybe gradually go through the timeline of all of your other experiences, and then maybe after we can get into what led you down like the research and podcasting path. So does that sound good?
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, all those experiences are what led me to the research and podcasting, in having experiences and wanting to kind of share those insights, um, which is something also that was some communicated in a sense. I use air quotes just because I always want to leave the door open in regards to receiving communication as to whether it's my own faulty interpretation. Is it something that was intentionally communicated, or is there something in between that, right? Because I always want to leave room for error, and we're dealing with the phenomenon, anomalous phenomena. I say phenomenon, but we're talking about potentially a variety of intelligences, and even something greater than intelligences, if you want to call it like a superstructure, or like what Jacques Vallée calls the meta system, in which it's actually more woven into reality itself than something that has as much agency as we attribute to it. But starting from a very young age, I was having experiences with what people could call a shadow entity. In my room, I was maybe 5 or 6 years old when it started, and super just like telepathic lock on, meaning there was like no room in for wait, did I hear like a voice, or like it was not subtle? And I saw what looked like shadow entities, but they had a very soft glow to them. And then I was moving, and the first thing I heard when I saw it was, "He can see us." And there were three of them, and they collapsed into an orb and moved like this, and I'm like trying to cover myself because I'm pretty freaked out. And experiences with those entities probably, I want to say, stopped by the time I was like 11 or 12 at the latest. And that every time I was frightened, it was never threatening, right? It was just like I didn't know what was going on at that time. I did not attribute that at all to UFOs. I just thought it was maybe like a spirit of some kind, because that's the only thing I really had the concept for. It didn't look like what I saw on TV as a gray, so I didn't assume it had anything to do with UFOs, even though um, starting at that age as well, I would see lights in the sky, and I had these disposable cameras, those old disposable cameras, and I'd go outside in the middle of the night and try to take pictures of them, and nothing ever turned out. They're terrible quality.
Yeah.
Um, but I had seen lights in the sky, and even I remember the first time that I had, I've had lucid dreams and such, but the first time that I had like a conscious out of body experience was when I was in first grade. I was sleeping over one of my friend's house, like it was one of my first sleepovers or such, and I was falling asleep, and I remember looking at the ceiling, and the whole time I'm in my own mind, I'm awake basically, right? So I'm looking at the ceiling, and then all of a sudden I start to rise out of my body, and then I'm looking down at myself. And it took me a moment because it was a seamless stream of consciousness. There wasn't like a lapse where I was like, it was black, or I was asleep, or I was out. It was just a single stream of consciousness where I began rising my body, and then looking down on myself. And then again, it took a moment to click, and then I'm like, holy shit, that's me. And then boom, right back in the body. And I'm like, oh my God, what was that? And so those kind of hypnagogic out of body experiences I had a number of times. I didn't have them daily per se, but they were frequent, and they always amazed me, right? Like the entity thing was a little frightening for me.
How much do you attribute that to like sleep paralysis, or do you think that's an actual astral like
So
projection of yourself?
I've had a bunch of sleep paralysis experiences as far as like I know exactly what sleep paralysis is. I actually know how to get myself out of sleep paralysis. Pretty much mastered that because it happens so frequently because my sleeping pattern's insane because of my work schedule. Uh, so between work, kids, research, and everything else, my sleep can be all over the place. Uh, and I've had plenty of sleep paralysis episodes, and I know exactly what that is. And that these were not those. Neither were the entity encounters. Could not be attributed to sleep paralysis because I know exactly what sleep paralysis is, what it feels like, and the physical sensations, even the phenomenological aspects of it. So those were not sleep paralysis. And, even though sleep paralysis in itself is an interesting kind of experience as well.
Oh yeah. Totally, right? Exactly. I mean, it's
Yeah.
still interesting what the mind is capable of. I always think about that aspect of the phenomenon, like even if this is all some type of projection or hallucination that's happening on some type of psychological level, like that, even that alone is super interesting. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And so those early type experiences always had my mind open, curious. I was always interested in things like ESP or even UFOs. And I actually live in the Hudson Valley, New York, where there was, a major UFO wave in the beginning of the 1980s to about the end of the 80s until really about the 90s. And so the area is kind of primed for that kind of thing. And, even as a young teenager, I came across a book called Night Siege, the Hudson Valley UFO Wave. And it was one of the last books that Dr. J. Allen Hynek was working on. And it was actually written, I believe, by Philip and Brogno, who was a professor in the local area. And I think Dr. J. Allen Hynek helped him with the research, or, they have Dr. J. Allen Hynek's name on the book. So even at a young age, I was researching. I was always fascinated by all these kind of things, and had different types of anomalous experiences. But the UFO thing didn't come hard at me in a direct way, at least through experiences again, until I was about 20 years old. And at that point, I had a series of kind of in your face encounters that kind of led me to where I am now in the research and engage in the phenomenon and getting actively involved. I don't know if you want me to go through some of those experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you've talked about I'm not sure if this is correct. You can correct me or not, but about like some type of precognitive
Yeah.
incident before like a car crash, and you saw like an orb, right? And then you kind of I guess saw everything that happened before and during and after and so forth. Something to that effect. Am I wrong there?
You're correct. But I mean, there's that whole thing is a whole series of events.
Yeah. Okay.
Uh,
Yeah. Let's get into it.
so yeah. So, fast forward to 2007, I'm 20 years old, and I was working an overnight shift. And when I was getting ready to leave my shift in the morning, and there was a coworker who I would always talk to. We talk like family stuff. He was I guess you can say like agnostic, skeptical type of guy. We never talked about anything weird or interesting per se. It was kind of work stuff. How's the family? This is what's going on in the building, that kind of stuff. And out of nowhere, one morning before I left my shift, he said, hey, did you hear about the UFOs in Mexico? And I'm thinking, like, it caught me off guard. So I just, like, in my head, I'm thinking, why would he say something like that? But then I just brushed it off and I said no, because I didn't in this particular instance. And so I thought kind of nothing of it after that, other than it was weird, and left to go home. I drove home, and it was an overnight shift. So I went to bed, and maybe like by 9 a.m. or something along that line, and I go to sleep. And in my sleep, I start having this dream. All of a sudden I'm in my dream, and I'm driving down one of my old neighborhood streets, which is actually where I had seen some of those lights in the sky that I was talking about from when I was a kid. And in my dream, there's just this like electric orange plasma UFO above my car while I'm driving in this dream. And it is like pulsing, and there's these like electrical, like bassy hum tone, if I can say it like that. And it was like reverberating, and I could feel like the vibrations from it. And in my dream, I'm super reactive, so I'm just trying to get away from this thing. I'm just like, oh my god, so I'm like flooring it and driving in this dream. And this goes on for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, where I'm trying to get away from this UFO, and it's like 25 feet above the car in the dream, and I can't get away from it. And all of a sudden I snap out of my dream. I'm awake. It's the afternoon, and I'm still like coming to. I'm still like waking up. And after a few minutes, one of my family members comes in the house, and they said, hey, did you hear about the UFOs in Mexico? And I was just like,
Yeah.
screw this. Like, okay, that's when it kind of hit me, right? Because the dream, after I woke up from the dream, I'm still kind of like coming back to reality, as it were. Like, what am I going to do today and such? But when that family member said that to me, that's when I was like, screw this. There's something, like, this is off. Right. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to go, down the street from me. There was this Chinese, fast food place that I used to go to all the time after the gym. So I was just like, I'm just going to go to the Chinese place, get some chicken and broccoli, and like gather
Munch
myself,
out and get distracted. Yeah.
just like ground myself pretty much.
Yeah.
So I get in the car and I start driving, and it's probably like 3:30 or 4 p.m. in the afternoon, probably mid to late spring. It's like perfectly blue sky outside, beautiful day. And within a few hundred feet of driving, when you're driving on this road, you have a clear view of the sky. And I look in the sky, and I just see an orange fireball stationary, hanging there. And I'm looking at it, and in my mind, the first thing I think is that's a freaking UFO. And as soon as I thought that, it started to move. And now I'm like, like super elated, like fascinated. And I was trying to chase it. Because it was, again, just because as I thought that this is a freaking UFO, like as I was thinking that, like I thought it was a UFO already when I saw it, just because of the obviousness of it, right? Like the size of it, the quality of it. And then once I thought that and it started moving, it only further reinforced that thinking, because it reacted to my thought, right? So I started chasing it, and it eventually got out of sight. And if anybody is in the New York or Hudson Valley area, it ends up being close to where the Jefferson Valley Mall is. So it got out of sight, and I was just like, I hate to use this word, I'm going to sound old, flabbergasted. I was totally like, elated from this experience, and it was very visceral. It was very real, and I didn't know what to make of it. So, that that stuck with me. And, at this time, actually, I had already had a meditation practice. So I'm practicing like Chan Zen Buddhist meditation that's coupled with Qigong and Taoist internal alchemy practices, because I was practicing martial arts, and the kind of marriage between Buddhism and Taoism is in the Shaolin martial arts, and I was studying Chinese martial arts, and it combines, because Buddhism alone has its own thing, and then the Taoist adds a more mystical element to it. And I was just doing these, I was doing these practices on like a daily basis for like 2 years at this point. And then I had found also, so I was already on the awakening path, and I was already practicing like Merkaba and stuff like that.
Meditation. Yeah,
Yeah,
like
like
I hear you.
pretty high level meditation stuff. And
Yeah.
like the Merkaba stuff is like a whole nother thing. And so, this experience only kind of like it reinforced all the practices that I was doing, and kind of like mind expansion. And so that event occurred in, mid to late spring. And then maybe a month or a month and a half later, I ended up getting into a car accident, and it was in that same exact location where I had the sighting. And that thought never occurred to me until years after, because I didn't, maybe I did see them as connected, but I never, for some reason, that piece of information didn't like sink in. But so it was probably a month or a month and a half later that I had gotten into a car accident and had this, I'll call it a trauma-induced out-of-body experience that simulated a near-death experience, because I was, conscious the whole time. And I, all of a sudden, the first thing I kind of remember or whatever is I'm face to face with this light entity, like a light being. And this entity, for some reason, in my perception, it felt like this entity was not separate from myself somehow. And there was this like beautiful crystalline angelic orchestra in the background, and just like a complete sense of peace and equanimity. And I'm not super religious, in the sense where like you would think about this in like Christianity or Catholicism, but I heard the words, God is all there is, ever was, and ever will be. Like that was part of this whole experience. And, all of a sudden it's like my reality rebooted, and now I'm above the scene of the accident. Well, there was more, there was a whole, again, there was a more phenomenological time space aspect to that, where it's really hard to explain. People say that you sometimes you can see in like a panorama, like 360 thing.
Yeah.
It was like that, but it wasn't just like a physical spatial 360. It was like a 360 time space, past, present, futures, one thing, including seeing all directions at once thing.
Like a tesseract maybe or something?
It was like it was even it was crazier than that. It was more spherical, if that makes sense.
Gotcha.
But it was like every time I try to recollect the experience, that like my mind starts to like overload, which happens with some of these experiences. And again, it's at that point that kind of everything reset or rebooted, and then all of a sudden I'm above the scene of the accident, and I'm looking down at the car accident. I see the ambulance, and I'm at this point, at the point where I'm like, okay, so this is it, huh? I thought I'm dead, and I'm looking down on this experience from some kind of astral form that I'm, no longer physically living. that was my sense. And I was like totally conscious of it. It wasn't like a passing, fleeting thing where I feel like I'm in a dream and I'm watching what's going on. I was conscious and I was aware and cognizant, and I was totally at peace. Like there was no remorse, there was no regret. I felt totally fine. Like this is it. And I'm looking down at the axe, and after, again, the time space distortion thing is hard to track, I guess. But then eventually I snapped in my body, and I'm like, holy shit, I'm alive. So that, and again, I didn't put this piece together for whatever reason for a number of years, actually. But the point at which that I was looking down at the accident was the exact location of where the fireball UFO orb was in the sky when I saw it the month and a half before. Like to the T, that was the vantage point of where I was looking down at. And I still don't know what that means per se, but just another fascinating thing. And again, I had to go to the hospital, and they did all these scans, make sure I don't have internal bleeding and whatnot. And they let me out the next day. And I was just happy to be alive. I was just,
Right.
that experience, I felt physically different afterwards, like viscerally physically different. And I don't know if that's like a side effect of a concussion or whatever it was, but I felt like high vibrational, after that
Like
experience.
grateful or something.
It was grateful, but there was a very, like, there was a physical, like, if I'm saying like, how do I feel right now? And right now I feel normal per se. But at that time, I felt physically different in my body. Right. There was a physical elation, like high vibrational state that I was feeling. It wasn't just internal. There was an external feeling too, like my body sense, like mind body connection thing. And yeah, so then, but I was super grateful, and I was just like, wow, man, like this, just to be here now and be alive and get to experience this kind of thing is a miracle. And so by the nighttime the next day, I'm in my room cleaning again, just like reflecting, I guess you can say. And I'm just like, man, it's just like a blessing to be alive. And then all of a sudden, I get this lock on, and my eyes are open, but there's like an overlay in my consciousness. I'm simultaneously aware of everything around me, but also this telepathic lock on that is mental, emotional, visual, and that's that I'm trying to explain how it was happening. But the first words or communication, that's how I can describe it, as a communication through this lock on, through like a highly potent impression, was come outside. But it was so direct. And I saw these two entities, and I hate to say this because it sounds so like typical ufology, that I saw these a male and a female, tall white type beings, right? Like in these spacesuit kind of things, like tight suits. And there was a whole download that started from that moment through the whole experience. So they said, come outside, and I already knew everything that was about to take place. I knew that they were here and they were outside, and they wanted to communicate in this whole thing.
Was this kind of like still in like that overlay? Like, were you still kind of looking at what was in front of you, but that line of communication was still overlaid and you were like you were visualizing, and you said maybe you would say you were even tuning into whatever the intelligence was, right? So would you say it's like
Or
that?
yeah, or they were tuning into me. It was like it was
True.
like a direct lock on. Meaning like there was no question like, wait, did I just hear something? Like none of that at all. Like it was just obvious, blatant. And I mean, people say like maybe they have control of the situation. Uh, it was very much overwhelming, but in a positive way. I felt like, again, I was already in this gratitude state thing, but I felt like a great kinship connection. Again, I hate to say stuff like this. It sounds like so new agey, but love. And,
Right.
and so I automatically just run outside because I know, again, that they're here in this whole thing. Like even like before I'm outside, like there was not a question in my mind as if they were going to be there or not. I knew that they were there. And I know that sounds kind of assumptive. I don't know, like an assumption, but like there was no question in my mind that when I was going to go out there that they were already here. So I go outside and there's like some trees kind of in the way, so I have to pass through when I get out of the door. And now this is like maybe 9:30 p.m. at night, and it's like, again, spring, summer, and as I'm trying to make my way through so where the trees were blocking the sky, so I can get out into the driveway and look better at the sky. As I'm going through there, I can hear like a really bassy hum, and it was like vroom, vroom. And while I'm hearing this hum, I'm feeling like a pulsing Kundalini awakening kind of thing, like just this overwhelming body sense of vibration, frequency, and it's like super like elating, super pleasant. When you hear people talk about like a Kundalini awakening thing, very much like that. And I get out past where the clearing is, so I can see the sky, and I see this craft that is like a very, like UFO physical metal craft, and it's shaped like a hexagon, and it has these lights going around the edges, and in the center there's like a square white light fixture, and it's like a very, very, very dark gray, not quite black, as far as I could tell. Like it was not blacker than the sky was.
Like a matte gray or something, kind of?
Yeah, but very dark.
Gotcha. Okay.
And I'm like my mind is blown, like during this whole thing. And so I had to run down these stairs and get into the driveway, and it's just gliding across. It's right over the trees. So maybe 150 feet in the air, maybe 100 feet. It was low. It was like, it was right over the trees. And I'm freaking out at this point because it's just like, it's the whole thing's an overwhelming experience, from the telepathic lock on to the feelings and the sensations and the body sensations that went along with that. With this, I'm having like a Kundalini awakening, basically, like a full body experience. I'm having this mental lock on, overwhelming senses of gratitude, love, connectedness, as if the way that I felt is that I could feel what they were feeling, and like on their level
Right.
of understanding and whatnot.
Collective consciousness, kind of.
Yeah, like our consciousnesses were merged, kind of. And it's gliding over me in the driveway, and I'm trying to like take it all in, and then it vanishes and then reappears 1,000 feet ahead of me over this man-made lake over there. And it was instantaneous. Like there was not a skip of a beat from going here to there. Like it was just one moment it was like right above me, and the next it was there already. Like there wasn't like a skip, right? Like it was just like not even a second wait. And because I was looking up at this object, and I was not looking across the street yet over this man-made lake. So when I saw it appear there and I was looking in that direction, I had seen these two other crafts there that were identical. And, they're moving around and you can see the lights going around them. And I'm like, at this point, I'm just like, holy crap. Like I'm now starting to question my reality and my perception and my well-being, to be quite honest. I'm thinking, did I hit my head so hard the day before in this car accident? Then I'm hallucinating. Like then I'm just like imagining this. Heck, like how can this be happening? Like the reality of the situation is starting to sink in, and my brain is starting to like rationalize what the hell is going on here. So the only way I can reconcile that was by going in my house and getting my family members. I needed somebody to see this. So I run in my house and two of my family members were there. And I said, guys, you got to come outside. They're like, why? I said, they're here. They said, who's here? I said, just come outside. So my two family members come outside. One of them happened to be the person that said, hey, did you see the UFOs in Mexico? The month and a half before. And so they come outside and we're in the driveway and we're watching these crafts in the sky, and they're just, going along, you can see the lights going around them, disappear, reappear somewhere else. And this whole thing's going on for like 20 minutes. And in my mind, I'm like convinced that like somehow the whole world knows about this, right? Like for whatever reason, I thought like this must be going on everywhere.
Right.
Because it was happening for me. That's just, like I thought disclosure was happening, and I didn't have the word disclosure in my lexicon then, but I thought like this was happening. Everything was happening.
Yeah.
Like there was some kind
like
of
Arrival.
yeah, like that. It really felt like that. Like truly, it was it was a disclosure event of sorts. I didn't realize until later it was my own, I guess you can say, but it was certainly a revelation of sorts. And again, this is going on for like 20 minutes, and I'm my mind body interface thing. I have these communications, right? Like this, my body's trying to you got to download it. It's instantaneous. It's this whole dimension of knowledge, or, whatever you want to call it, information. And I'm trying to I'm like taking it in, right? Trying to translate it, if you want to say that. And I got, all these kind of impressions. And I have to say again that I don't know if I'm translating it wrong, my brain is trying to reconcile what's going on, so it's interpreting these ideas. I really don't know. It felt like a direct communication, and it felt genuine. That's all I can really say to that effect. And that these entities are here, that they're somehow related to us. They want people to know that they're here, and they wish us well, kind of thing. That there was like an overwhelming sense of that, and that, yeah, they wanted people to know that they were here. And in that regard, that's what ended up being why I'm doing what I'm doing now, and engaging the phenomenon, sharing information. But also a major component of that was, eventually finding CE5, because, I realized even from that experience that, people, are not going to have the realization of this reality, the UFO reality, the phenomenon, just by like hearing or watching a documentary, or even hearing me talk or anybody else talk. Like I had some realization as to people had to have their own experience for it to click.
Yes.
Because if you're watching a documentary and it's compelling, it's convincing. There's always still that one thread, that one splinter of a question that's like, well, what if? Like, and when you have the experience and there's no question in your mind and the reality has been revealed to you, that's when the paradigm shift just clicks in, and like all these other faculties come online, and you know firsthand that there's way more to reality. Experientially, you know for a fact, and there's no question anymore as to the greater reality, right? The nature of reality itself, in a sense. So subsequently, I mean, so that was these kind of like series of events that led me into like full blown dedication to this kind of UFO consciousness research, but actually trying to do something beyond taking this information in for myself, right? Is trying to share it, trying to communicate it, and again, subsequently getting very involved in what is called the CE5 initiative. I know there's a lot of uh, ideas and feelings about Dr.
Right.
Stephen Greer, rightfully so, for many reasons. And everybody who has their ideas and impressions on him is, they're totally entitled to that. And I totally understand. But finding his work was very important on my path. And later on, I found other people who were doing the work that he was doing, like Mission Rama in the 1970s was going out and initiating contact and having program sightings using meditation and group coherence and all these other type of meditative and contemplative exercises. But it just so happened I was watching YouTube, where we all go for our answers.
Yep.
And I came across the Disclosure Project. And I was blown away because it's not like UFOs weren't on my radar at that time. I had been reading books and doing research before these events. Afterward, I went into like, it became like my full-time life mission kind of thing. But I came across the video. There's like a short clip of Clifford Stone talking about 57 different species of non-human intelligence that the US government is aware about and has categorized. And that led me to the longer, like 2-hour Washington, D.C. National Press Club conference of May 9th, 2001. And so this is around 2008 that I finally came across this. And I'm watching the Full Disclosure Project, and I was blown away by how professional it seemed, how matter of fact the witnesses seemed, their credentials, the fact that this occurred in Washington, D.C. And like one of the first things that struck me is like you have all these military and corporate witnesses. There's a guy from NASA there, and I'm like, who the hell is this doctor guy? He's not one of these military witnesses. Why is he running the show over here? Like, why is he the MC, the master of ceremonies for this event?
Right.
So I'm like, so I start researching, like, who is this guy? And through that, I found CSETI, right? The Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And I found that the CSETI.org at the time, old school, it's not around anymore. I believe CSETI has officially disbanded, and that's a whole nother discussion, which happened in 2012 after the release of the film Sirius. So I came across CSETI.org, and I found some lectures by Dr. Stephen Greer that were talking about CE5. So, the first thing that struck me when I was listening to his discussions about CE5 was that the way he was describing how contact was occurring and how it occurs and whatnot, I had not heard anybody talk so fluently about how contact occurs. And at this point in time now, I have firsthand experience to kind of compare that to, as far as like a bullshit meter. And I know, again, people say whatever about Dr. Stephen Greer, but the way that he was talking, there's no question in my mind that he had experienced the same thing firsthand, because there's just some nuanced details.
He's confident.
It's more than confidence.
Yeah.
There's nuanced details about him explaining how the contact occurs that you would not have that type of insight any other way unless you had the experience. I don't care how many science fiction books or whatever you read. There were just subtle, nuanced details that you could only express after having that kind of experience. So that raised a flag in a sense to say, okay, this guy's talking from experience, because just the level of nuance he's discussing it, and I can compare it to my own firsthand experience. This guy knows what he's talking about. But of course, I still want to vet him, right? I wanted to vet the CE5 protocol, so to speak. So I consumed all that information. I was researching all the CSETI information diligently, the CE5 protocols, and then I began practicing them daily. And I was already practicing all this, like Chan Zen,
Contact
Merkaba,
modalities, kind of meditation
meditation
like
stuff. So
Yeah.
before the experiences, to me, they were just like awakening processes, right? I didn't see them as contact modalities until afterwards. So by the time I came across CE5, I already had the training basically in place. Now I just had to adapt and add the protocols, which is intention and whatnot, to what I was already doing. I already had like a lot of experience, because again, I was at that point, I was meditating almost 3 hours a day on an average, and then other days more. So I added this into the mix, and then you add the sky watch aspect to it. Now you're meditating outside at night, so it increased my repertoire in that sense. So with the CE5 protocols, I was already having mild success with that, and because of that, I formed the first CE5 social networking groups back in 2009. And, it wasn't until 2010 that I actually went to my first CSETI event, which was a 3-day a night conference / CE5 training. And, that experience was, I got the validation I was looking for as to, like, is Stephen Greer the real deal when it came to the CE5 contact and stuff. Because, of course, there was the anomalous phenomena in the sky. And yeah, again, this was in 2010 that I went to this event that I'm referring to here. And there was one instance where it was the first night, actually. And, Stephen Greer did his meditation training, and, he has a background. He was an instructor in transcendental meditation for Maharishi Mahesh Yogi back in the day, and a Sanskrit student and a meditation teacher. So the guy, when it comes to the meditation stuff, he's the real deal. And so he was teaching meditation and stuff, and then he was teaching the CE5 protocols. So just on the very first night, before we even were doing the protocols, there were stuff going on in the sky. And this is in Rio Rico, Arizona, beautiful sky. And very like desolate location. And we did like the first night's outdoor CE5 that night. And this was a larger group. This was about 200 people at this event. And we're on this giant patio, and we do like a guided meditation. And then we have the silent aspect to it. And within the first few, like maybe 20 minutes of that, we're doing like the sky watch part, I guess you can say now, after the meditation. And I saw this ruby red orb, like slightly above, it was like maybe 15 to 20 feet in the air, in the kind of the patio location. So it was not out in the sky. It was in like where we were.
Wow.
And maybe 15, 20 feet away from me, I saw this ruby red orb. And it looked like it was like somebody impressed it onto reality. If it, like, I mean, Stephen Greer would call this like a trans-dimensional object. Like, that's how he would describe it. But all I know is it looked like if you stare at a really bright light and then you look in front of you and you see like, the after image effect.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
it looked like that, but more real, and it wasn't like fading or going away or morphing, right? It was just there, but it had that quality to it, as like, again, as if somebody impressed it on into reality, maybe from like a higher dimension or something. I don't know, but that's so I'm looking at it and I'm just like looking around, like, no, I'm waiting for somebody to be like, oh my God, or like something like that. No, and nobody does it. So I'm like, I'm not going to say shit about this because, like, number one, I don't know if my mind is playing tricks on me and I'm just seeing what I want to see or what, but nobody else is like gasping, like, oh my God, do you see that? So I was like, screw this. I'm going to just keep this to myself. And maybe I'm still like debating in my mind is like, if my brain is creating some kind of image to like live up to this experience or
Right.
whatever. So I just like put it aside. I'm like, whatever, because after maybe a minute, it disappeared. And maybe a minute or two after that, Dr. Stephen Greer takes his laser and says, there's just a ruby red orb here. And he circles in the exact location. So at that point, that was the validation I was looking for, right there. That's the level of high strangeness where there's no coincidence in that. I'm sorry. Like, this location, what he described is exactly what I had seen and not purposely not said anything about. And that kind of direct validation is something I was looking for. And I was like, okay, this is the real deal as far as that whole, Stephen Greer and his teaching of CE5.
Right.
Yeah, I had already had my own experiences in my own location and I was doing CE5s, but that for me validated that he was not bullshitting when he was talking about CE5. And, subsequently I went to a week-long CSETI event in Borrego Springs, California. And, that was a week-long, I'm actually going to do a video on that because that's like maybe a whole hour-long video describing my experience there of, him, Dr. Stephen Greer, going through remote viewing training, something called emotive listening, CE5 fieldwork training, and the like. And so that, at that point I was super involved in the CE5 initiative, and ultimately it kind of led me here right now to engage in the phenomenon.
So we actually have a good question here in the chat that I wanted to ask you real quick. And it looks like you're maybe a little glitched, James. I'm not sure if it's on my end or not. Yeah, in the chat they're saying you're a little glitched. You're frozen here.
Right now on my screen I see that I'm not moving, and I am moving. So I don't know.
Let's maybe how about you leave and come back maybe. Let's try that.
Okay, hold on. Yeah. Let me all right, 1 second.
No worries. Sorry about the technical issues, guys. Thanks everybody who's made it out tonight, or not tonight, actually afternoon. It's I'm used to doing these at night. So appreciate it. Hey Christian, glad you made it in here. I'm sure you had a long night, understandable, you're busy and so forth, so we get it. But yeah, today it's been good. It's been nice hearing James go through his story. It makes it easy for me to not have to steer everything in a specific direction. He's really on top of his experiences. So I really, really appreciate that. But yeah, we're just going to wait here until James gets back, and we'll go from there. So yeah, feel free to toss some cues in the chat for James if anybody has any. If not, all good. Welcome, Jim Chambers. UFO Twitter brought me here. Nice. I think we got James back. Let's take a look here. Hold on. Hey, James.
Hey, sorry about that.
It happens. It was the NHI.
NHI was like, all right, enough about Stephen Greer.
Enough about Stephen Greer.
Is
Yeah,
he
we
the
had
NHI
the CIA.
or the CIA? They're like,
Yeah,
all
yeah,
right,
or the
F
CIA.
this dude. For better
But
or worse.
yeah, so we had left off on a question I wanted to actually ask you. So outside of which I think incorporates part of like Stephen Greer's whole love and light type of perspective, but the opposite of that is the question from our co-host here. He says, sorry, James, his electronics failed today, but he asked, have you ever had any negative experiences with the phenomenon or any physical effects with it? So yeah.
So I've had like a wide range of experiences. And I think it's important to say here that, like, when we say the phenomenon, I don't think we're talking about just one thing. I think we're dealing with a variety of, and I think, again, once you have out of body experience, once you have a near death experience, once you have a UFO encounter, as Jacques Vallée had discussed, post contact effects, which that terminology by Vallée was taken and turned by, you can say, the intelligence community. Maybe people want to say he's part of that, whatever, and called the hitchhiker effect. But before the hitchhiker effect, all of these things were noted. The hitchhiker effect is not new, right? And what I believe that actually is, I don't like. Again, there was a gentleman on Twitter who very beautifully and eloquently discussed this. I'm forgetting his Twitter or X handle, but in another post he was talking about the Bhagavad Gita and like Buddhism and Vedanta. But this gentleman was saying like, you are the hitchhiker, and he's absolutely right. In my opinion, is that, I mean, you can argue that once you have this kind of encounter, there's a form of entanglement between you and whatever it was that you interacted with. But I believe, once you have any of these experiences, even if you're doing like high level meditation, you have a transcendental experience, like what you've done now, again, whether it's the transcendental meditation experience, and I'm not talking about TM, I'm just talking about like a samadhi, expansive consciousness experience, or psychedelics, right? Or again, a near death experience. What happens is your aperture of reality is broadening, and now you're seeing everything that's on the edges that you had never seen before, and it's just broadening and broadening. So there's other things going on that you normally wouldn't have perceived, but your aperture is now open to those realities, for better or worse, right? And there's also a baseline consciousness thing that's partially reflective, not only of your conscious awareness, but of your subconscious inclinations. And what in like Samkhya philosophy or yogic philosophy, we can call samskaras, and those are the subtle impressions on your awareness that you've compiled through conditioning, previous life experience. And those are like pieces of glass or even smudges that are on your conscious reality that are altering your experiences. So, like, definitely, I think that there are what we would consider negative entities, right? For UFO experiences, like 99.9999% of my experiences have been positive, both, mentally, physically, spiritually, if we want to go there, metaphysically. They seem to be instructive. They seem to be in good nature. And complementary to me in that sense. So
Mm.
maybe that's because I'm lucky, right? I don't know why that is. Those were just the cards for me. My friend J. Christopher King will tell me I got the cosmic high five, kind of package.
Yeah.
I just, for whatever reason, I've had experiences that could seem negative with like spirit entities or something like that. And those are, I haven't really talked about much of those publicly.
Hmm.
But not even those, right? And so again, these are all seem like teaching experiences for me where I
Right.
feel very confident in my navigation of metaphysics because of it. And that
Mhm.
even those experiences that were like scarier, I was never physically harmed. Never. Um, maybe I have a strong spiritual protection. I don't know, but I was never, but I think there's something to that, but I've had
I think
experiences.
there's probably lessons, right? Is what you would say, like you're saying, and I think to me, like a lot of what your experiences sound like, they're very synchronistic. Like they tie back around throughout time, and I feel almost oddly the same in a lot of my own experiences. And I feel like when you compare movies like Interstellar, and you look at like what time is and like the connection between space and time and loved ones, and you think about life, right? Like life and death. And it's strange because I think that that's a lot of where uh, these UFOs or messages or communications are coming from. It's everything outside of time, right? And if that's death or that's transcendence, whatever that is, I mean, it seems to have a direct line of communication sometimes for us. And I don't know, I just think that that's a lot of what I'm hearing from your own experiences. But I did want to maybe ask you this, if it's all right. I wanted to ask you, what do you think, like, in regards to your experiences, what has changed in your perception over the years? I mean, how do you discern between the psychological and physical reality of your experiences?
Yeah. Well, before I go on that, I do want to say that like people who report negative experiences and whatnot, we should listen to those people.
Yes.
And I, there, that's just some, for whatever reason, I've done research and and whatnot, but I don't have the firsthand experiences that they do with that. So I can't speak to that necessarily. Um, but it's something that I hope we learn more about. And I do absolutely think, and I know this is going to ring off people's conspiracy bells, but I absolutely do think that there is something to um, CIA staged abductions. I think that's part of the equation, and I know that's
Right.
very upsetting to people. And I think the most disturbing thing about that is that it could happen, and that it would happen, and that our own fellow humans would do something like that. And I think
Right.
the initial jerk reaction to hearing something like that, also, for somebody who had an experience with what they perceive as an alien or extraterrestrial, to tell them that no, that was actually like a fox or a staged thing by the CIA. I, you know, I think that's demeaning. So I'm never going to say to somebody, well, it sounds like you were my labbed. I want to also like shed light on that. Like we shouldn't be going around doing that. Like, oh, who was my labbed and which one was it? But at the same time, I did a video on something called targeted individuals. And in that video, there's a clip I included of John Alexander talking. First, he's saying this, not me, that they used all these types of mental hypnosis and NLP tricks to make people believe that they had alien encounters. So you have that. You have Jacques Vallée saying that there's a CIA document that he secured where there were staged abductions in Argentina and Brazil, South America, Colores comes to mind. And if you were the CIA, that would be the perfect place to stage something like that, because you wouldn't want to do it. You couldn't do it on homeland, right? You'd have to do it
Right.
where you have purview, and the CIA has purview, extra national. So out of the US. So there's that's a whole can of worms. That's
stagecraft.
It's important. I don't think we should overlook it. I don't like to focus on too much, because I like to focus on all the positive transformative aspects, but that's something, and I hope some of my colleagues will be putting out some information on that in the near future. I think they will. So look out for some disturbing but important research on that. But I'm sorry, I shouldn't have detracted so much, but what was your question again?
No, I no worries. I think it's totally relevant that you chose to go back to that, because I mean, yeah, I definitely agree that there needs to be a empathy towards people who are experiencing the phenomena in a negative way. In regards to like stagecraft and Jacques Vallée kind of mentioning that, I do think that and this is something I've been playing around with. I don't know if maybe even Colares maybe possibly was something like that. A lot of people have kind of been speculating that lately too. You know what I mean? So it's a possibility. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it's
and the whole face peeler thing that came up. It's like if you listen to the accountants, like ever so human, does not sound.
And the fact that it's international, right? Like what you were saying too. Like,
yeah, and also, and again, if I don't want to just say, oh, it's the CIA, right? Like again, people can hate all they want, but when it comes to Stephen Greer talking about the nature of the secrecy group being international and proprietary, private companies like work for others, I think that is spot on. And I should just leave that at that.
No, yeah, I agree. And just one last comment to that. Somebody put here in the thread, CIA doesn't need to do that when the DOE can just pay volunteers. Who knows, right?
Yeah. And yeah, for sure.
Too many possibilities, right? So what my question was, to toss it back, was in regards to your experiences. I was just wanting to know what has changed in your perception over the years, and how do you discern between those being psychological and physical in our reality?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So, man, that's a great question. And there's a lot of different avenues you can go on that. One of my favorite books, even people say, what's your favorite UFO book? And I always jokingly will add, actually, one of my favorite UFO books is called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind by Shunryu Suzuki. And it's a book about Zen Buddhism and having the beginner's mind, never settling for like, everything kind of approach, keeping your mind open in a grounded way, not in a way where like, oh, I don't know what anything is anymore. Like, yeah, because some of this can invoke that, right? You have a really intense experience, and now all of a sudden you're questioning your entire reality. So it's important to ground yourself. There's experiencers who go out there and talk in proclamations, and as if they have all the answers to everything, and they say the phenomenon is this, this is what they're doing and this is who they are. I mean, there's like, okay, you can say this is what you think, but to say that definitively, I don't think could be the entire truth, because we clearly don't have all the answers. Like, and there could be aspects of that are true, but I think we should be careful to make such final determinations and then tell others that's what the truth is, when like we all have fragments of the truth and reality. Not it has to be a collective thing. If we're all like fractals of the infinite consciousness, then we all have a piece of whatever it is that we're all trying to put together.
Right.
But so for me, like, psychological versus objective physical reality is, in a lot of my experiences, I had witnesses, right, who saw exactly what I saw, or an approximation of that. So if they're seeing it and I'm seeing it, I don't think at that point it's purely psychological, or it could be attributed to such. If it's some kind of collective psychology and they're seeing what I'm seeing and nobody else is, that's even more fascinating and needs to be investigated. Right. I think that because that's still talking to, there's a non-local consciousness effect that's occurring between these people, not these people. But something's physically there as far as anybody else can tell. So there's definitely a subjective phenomenological aspect to this, but there's also an objective, like, oh my God, there's a tic tac there kind of thing as well. So, where does one part from the other is a great question. And so I think it's important to stay grounded, keep your mind open, and refining consciousness through discernment practices is something that I always like to do. So I think that having some kind of daily practice in regards to that is helpful.
Yeah. I love it. I love that answer. I just, I don't know. Like, I kind of think about the phenomena again as, again, like what I was saying earlier, messages from outside of time. Whether it actually is appearing in our reality or not, I think that nature is reality. Nature is technology. So every idea, right, can create something. And if there's a higher sentience, then obviously we're intertwined with that, right, on that quantum level. So I think that, yeah, there's something happening here, in both psychological and physical realms that we can't explain. And whether that's terrestrial, interdimensional, or whatever you want to call it, I mean, it's real, it's there. And a lot of, I think, what I think people are starting to learn is that most of this, like, Hollywood threat space alien narrative is kind of been the proponent of why people can't speak about this, right? To me, I think this is like a very, very spiritual type of thing. And yeah, I mean, what do you think?
I do think that we're dealing with a number of things, and like I do think that the typical UFO extraterrestrial hypothesis aspect is completely logical.
Yes.
And even within my own experiences, I've had such a variety of experiences that in different cases, it seemed like that I was interacting with something else, and there was a feeling quality to that as well. And how some of the interactions occurred. So I do think that there are the idea that we're being visited by extraterrestrial seems like super logic and obvious to me. Like, why wouldn't some kind of
Right.
extraterrestrial
But it's
intelligence?
not everything, right? Is what you mean,
No,
right?
not right.
Yeah,
But I do think that
exactly.
there's other much stranger stuff that we try to use language to describe and make sense, and we just don't even have the frameworks to
Right.
properly place whatever that can be. Because again, I do think there's something I'm working on with a colleague called interactivity, and it talks about like this feedback loop with consciousness, and again, like a synchronicity. I don't think, like, let's just say extraterrestrials are going around organizing synchronicities to lead us down a certain path, right? So that's something other, right? I think that's something else. That's like
Right.
what people would call extra, right? That's like something extra, like the interstellar kind of film, like, right, that wasn't like
Yeah.
extraterrestrials coming in a spaceship over here, and like that's something else, right? But it's interactive in a way where it responds instantaneously to your consciousness and your state of being and your level of awareness. So that's something way else than just us being visited by extraterrestrials, and even, let's say, cryptoterrestrials, and them coming to a nuclear facility and shutting nukes down, right? I think that's a different kind of thing. And again, you have all these vast encounters, and at the same time, we have intelligence operations that are intentionally trying to blend everything into one thing, but at the same time trying to mislead people. And I'm not saying we should be paranoid about that. I mean, we should be concerned, yes, but like, we have to be able to have our own ideas and our own impressions, not be completely led by any narratives, right? We shouldn't be led by a narrative that's trying to make UFOs out to be a national security threat, and we need to be worried, and that kind of messaging. But there's also kind of like the love and light thing, where that could also go a little extreme. And
Exactly.
So maybe there are intelligences and entities out there that do have good intentions for us in mind, or at worst, or neutral. But I do think that there's a number of things going on. You have very kind of like physical UFO, potentially extraterrestrial, cryptoterrestrial, extraterrestrial, but they're very physical and sentient entities that we can relate to us on a level of sentience, at least. There's definitely seems to be something that's extra dimensional, which we would attribute in metaphysics as like angels or light beings that are working on some kind of higher level. And maybe that's like a greater consciousness thing that's that's their version of stepping down to interact with us. They have to interact in that level, so we have like a way of comprehending it. There's so there's a whole complex thing to that, right? Because we have the cultural effects that Jacques Vallée talks about, but those cultural effects are happening from the UFO phenomenon, potentially from other non-human intelligence that people would call spiritual entities. And then we have the interference of intelligence, the intelligence community, for whatever reason, whether, they want to argue they're doing it for our best interest or for national security and protect the information that they do have and protect the understanding that they do have for competitive national edge, which I don't discount that either, whatever. And that's not my job. That's not what I have to do. So, who am I to judge them? Although some of the stuff sounds like overdoing it and sounds even harmful in a sense, but you have all these things going on at the same time, and we're trying to figure it out, basically.
Yeah, I think it's human nature to try to guard information and also create narratives. I think that's really where the power is at. So when you have people wrapping it up in national security, it makes sense that there's a lot of these narratives. Also, I feel kind of like now embarrassed now that you mentioned all of the different factions of phenomena, and I was like, I landed right there on spiritual. I guess I meant that probably in my own experience, but yeah, no, I definitely agree. I mean, just the whole line of phenomena, I think, is just fascinating, and it has to be probable, in my opinion. When you look at just the vastness of the universe, it's like, yeah, something's happening out there, and it's probably coming here, and vice versa.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can look at the whole thing as spiritual in a sense that, if you want to get really spiritual, or even Gnostic.
Yeah.
The Essenes, where they saw this kind of polarity between light and darkness, and everything manifested in physical reality is just a result of that balance. It's actually a balance. It's not they're opposing forces, but it creates a balance. And all of the step downs from that, levels of everything being merged into one supreme, unconditioned and indifferentiated consciousness that we're all tapping into, to the step down of every molecule and atom and different levels of sentience with different agencies, like not intelligence agencies, but like agency of sentience, like self-awareness, and different planets with different beings. I think all of that exists and it's all relevant. And we can look at it from every framework, from the bottom all the way to the top, and saying like, this is some kind of grand cosmic play where it's all God just observing itself and, kind of thing. And we're all like molecules of the supreme intelligence,
Right.
playing out this thing. Right. And that like everything's actually perfect. And so I do think that there is like a kind of like greater aspect of that like that, but we're here in our relevant perspectives, in like a dance or a feedback with that greater self-sentient infinite awareness. So and each vantage point is valid, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. There's a lot of avenues we can go down in regards to how you can find your path to this expansive knowledge, or what people want to call the Akashic records, right? So yeah, there's too many avenues to that. But James, you got anything coming up? Any good interviews coming up as we close out for the day here?
Yeah, I mean, I usually don't announce my interviews. I just throw them out like, hey,
Just toss them out. But yeah, if
yeah,
you got any, I'd love to check them out and know who you got coming
yeah.
up.
I mean,
Love
I'll
to.
just say the next. I think the next one that I'm doing is going to be Grant Cameron. I love Grant. I can say now at this point he's an old friend. He's I call him the phenom.
He's on it, dude. He's so on it.
Because I saw his transformation into the consciousness thing. I was doing UFO research for a while, and I had saw the UFO presidents thing, and I always considered him a great researcher. And then I, witnessed from afar his transformation into the consciousness stuff. And it's been amazing to see that kind of, I call him like a conduit, man. This guy just has a way. I mean, people, will say, oh, Grant, he's gone too far this time. And maybe they're right, but it's like, in a lot of ways, he's way ahead of his time. And he has a way of just getting these details that are completely off the radar. They're not on anybody's radar, about even like the intelligence community, or like he met Tim Taylor like back in the day, right? Before anybody
Right.
even knew who he was. He was with Chris Bledsoe in Pennsylvania at this house, and he met him. He just finds himself in these places. So Grant, I always love talking to him.
Yeah, and I like the correlation he makes between music and the phenomena and downloads and whatnot. I love that stuff. So yeah, definitely a wealth of knowledge. But yeah, James, thanks again for coming through, man. I really had a good time chatting it up with you, and we should do it again sometime in the future. So yeah, thanks again, everybody, for tuning into the Portal Room. Have a good one.